Thank you, guys. If you have your Bibles, and I hope that you do, turn with me to John chapter 18. And in just a moment, we're going to look at a couple of verses there in John chapter 18. About a year before his death, Christopher Reeve, having suffered an equestrian accident, becoming a quadriplegic, was speaking to a group of Yale students on a burgeoning technology of stem cell research. And if you remember back in the early 2000s, it was a very controversial topic. The only stem cells they had were embryonic stem cells, and there was this great debate over how can we ethically do that. All the good that is there, and yet all the dangers that are there as well. And so Reeve was speaking to these Yale students when he made the statement that no religion should have a seat at the table when debating public policy. No religion should have a seat at the table when debating public policy. His thought is that it doesn't matter what you believe, and you're free to believe whatever it is that you want to believe, but that those beliefs should remain in private whenever we're having important public discussions. A couple of years ago, I was invited to speak to an MBA class at a secular university, and I was told that before I came to speak that there was a lengthy debate in that class of whether or not I should be allowed to speak. It was the belief by some of the students that my presence there would be a violation of their First Amendment rights. All right. Let's not even talk about the fact that that's the complete opposite of what the First Amendment is all about. But think about that for a moment. They have no problem with me believing what I believe. They have no problem with me doing what I do. But what they're saying is, if you believe that, and if you're going to do that, then we're now going to limit you into these private spaces, and you should not have a voice in the public discussion. Let's forget about how un-American that is for a moment and just talk about what that means regarding truth. It reveals something. And I think it reveals something not just about what they believe, but I think it reveals something very deeply about what many of us in this room believe. You see, modern society believes that truth is divided, that there is a sacred and a secular, that there is a private and a public, that science is on one side and facts and religion is on the other, that value is on one side and that the facts are on another. And there's a very sharp divide. And they don't believe that there should be an intermingling of the two. They believe that the only place the two should intermingle is within your own private life. As you live and breathe and believe in whatever it is that you want to believe, but then as you step into the public sphere, you have to now buy into these basic concepts of what we believe to be true. I think the best way to imagine it is to use Francis Schaeffer's illustration of a two-story house. Imagine a two-story house where the living quarters are upstairs and maybe there's a place of business that kind of operates in the downstairs. And so the family is there, but in the downstairs, it's where you welcome guests, it's where you do business, it's where the outsiders come in. The outside world now collides with your home, your inside world. But upstairs, nobody else goes upstairs except for the family. That's a kind of a sacred space that what's taking place on the upstairs. Kind of the White House is a grand example of this. A family lives in the upstairs of the White House, but business is done downstairs. Imagine an old shop owner that would have an apartment above his business. The government has a deep say in what happens in the midst of that business, but they don't have a say in what happens in the upstairs. That's how many of us have divided truth. We believe that there are upstairs truths and downstairs truth, and so in the upstairs, that's your private life. You can believe whatever it is that you want to believe. In the downstairs, that's public life. That's where we deal with facts. And so upstairs are values. Downstairs are facts. Upstairs is faith. Downstairs is science. Upstairs is private. Downstairs is faith. And what Reeves was saying and what some of those students in that class was saying is, you can do whatever you want to upstairs, but don't you dare bring your private beliefs downstairs into this public debate because they have no business here. It's a divided truth. And it's the preeminent theory of truth today, not only outside of these walls, but actually inside these walls. And notice what it does. Notice in that scenario, nobody ever debates your faith. You can believe whatever it is that you want to believe. They don't debate it because they don't even want to talk about it because it's upstairs stuff. You believe whatever you want to believe in your own house. You do whatever it is that you want to do in your own house. You find what is right for you upstairs. But whenever you come downstairs, there are some basic premises and principles that we as a society are going to operate by. And don't you dare bring your religion into that. And yet the New Testament gives us some very bad news. It's a very different philosophy and theory about what truth is. Jesus proclaims a truth that is total truth, that there is no divide between public and private. There is no divide between sacred and secular. There is no divide between the upstairs and the downstairs. But instead, that the gospel now invades every aspect of our lives, and that it actually creates a worldview by which you begin to not only view your private world, but it begins to understand and to illustrate and to explain the world in its totality. And so the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ is that Jesus shows us that God is not just the man upstairs. He's also the man downstairs. And that's something that Pilate, the Roman governor, struggled with. Let's read this in John chapter 18. So Jesus has been arrested. He ultimately leads up to the man who's in charge, and that is Pilate, for the Romans that are now investigating him. And here's what Jesus answers to Pilate. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world. Then Pilate said to him, so you are a king? And Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? I remember in the movie A Time to Kill, Samuel L. Jackson was playing the main character, and he was an African-American man living in an all-white community, and something horrific happened to one of his daughters, and he went to the police, expecting the police to arrest the men who had done this and throw them in jail, if not execute them. And yet the police said that chances are they would never be tried, they could never be convicted in the town because of it being an all-white town. And so Samuel L. Jackson went out and took justice into his own hands and killed the abusers of his daughter. And then, of course, he was arrested. And he gets this court-appointed attorney. And the attorney is there telling him the most important thing of this whole process is the jury selection process. That if you get a bad jury, if you get a jury that isn't sympathetic to you, you're going to lose the whole trial. And so all their time and all their energy went into selecting this jury. And the jury looked nothing like him. And I'll never forget, he's sitting there and he looks over at this all-white jury. And he turns to his lawyer and says, that's supposed to be a jury of my peers? He'd lost. And if it wasn't for the brilliance of his lawyer, Matthew McConaughey, he would have lost. But Matthew could take care of him in that moment, right? But it symbolizes that the American justice system has a history of injustice. It's not perfect. That in our justice system, power and race and money and prestige does play a part, far too much of a part. But at least we have this desire of blind justice. The Lady Justice is symbolized as having a blindfold on and having scales in her hands. And that's what we're pursuing after, a legal system that treats everyone the same. That doesn't matter how much money or power or influence you have, that the legal system is all the same. That's what we're pursuing after. We're not there. We're a long way from that. But at least that's what we want. In the day of Jesus, they didn't even want that. It wasn't even a desire. The thought of the justice system in the day of Jesus was a way for the powerful to hold on to their power, to exploit the poor. We saw this in 1 Corinthians. We saw this as Paul was telling the church at Corinth, don't use this unjust system. Don't use this unjust system to now exploit the poor brothers and sisters in Christ. You who are wealthy, don't use this system that you know is stacked against them, that is ungodly. Instead, you go and settle that matter by yourself using godly principles, gospel principles, because the system that you have set up exploits the poor, and the gospel doesn't want to do that. And so it's no surprise to us that when Jesus was arrested, as we saw last week, that his trial wasn't fair. The charges were made up, and even the process of the trial did not follow the general protocol of the day. Everything was stacked against him. It's a reminder to us that even in the midst of the injustices of life, and while the church should be fighting for justice, that there is still a sovereign plan of God that is at work, and God can even use this trumped up kind of system here, this failing system. He can use that now to have his will and purpose come through. And so Jesus is arrested, and he's led to the high priest, but he's led to the former high priest, Annas. And now, in biblical times, whenever you were the high priest, you were generally the high priest until you died. But for whatever reason in that time, he had passed on his high priestly kind of role to his son-in-law, but he was still living, and he was still kind of the one that was esteemed. And so they brought Jesus to Annas, and Annas begins to kind of figure out what's going on with Jesus, begins to quiz him. And John begins to tell the story of Jesus interacting with these officials, and at the same time, he tells the background story of Peter now denying Jesus. And so Annas and Jesus have this conversation. Annas sends him over to Caiaphas, his son-in-law, the reigning high priest, the one that from a Jewish perspective had a right to say, hey, we're going to charge you with what's going on. And the Jewish charge against Jesus was that he was saying he was a king, that he was the Son of God, and that would be heresy. But the Romans didn't care about theological problems. They didn't care about heresy. And so the charge before the Romans was that Jesus was claiming to be a king, and that was now treason. And so he comes before Caiaphas, who Caiaphas was the one who just several chapters ago said it'd be fine if an innocent man dies, if that saves the whole nation. And so Caiaphas says, all right, let's officially charge him and take him to the Roman government so they can execute him. And so they take him to Pilate. Well, Pilate is now trying to figure out, what am I going to do with this guy? Pilate doesn't care. Pilate doesn't care about what's going on in Jewish life. He doesn't care if he claims to be the Son of God. And he doesn't even believe that he's claiming to be one that's going to overthrow the Roman government, because how could he ever want to do that? Pilate wanted to let him go. But Pilate had to manage these Jewish people because he didn't want an uprising, which would then cause his bosses in Rome to come down and think he wasn't doing a good job. So he's trying to figure out how to navigate this to the best of his ability. So now he's beginning to quiz Jesus. And he asked Jesus, is this charge true? Do you claim to be a God here? Are you going to try to overthrow me? And Jesus in verse 36 says, my kingdom is not of this world. It illustrates for us what we said began in chapter 13 when Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. We said that we're going to have this collision that's now going to take place of the way of this world and the kingdom of God. And Jesus now kind of reiterates that basic kind of concept of what's going on there. And he goes on to say, and it gives us some insight into last week's sermon. It says, if my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. And it shows now in part why Peter was fighting. Peter didn't understand. Peter didn't understand that the plan of Jesus was not to overthrow the Roman government and to establish an earthly kingdom at this moment. He didn't get that. He didn't understand it. And so when Jesus got arrested, for Peter, it was go time. And so he pulled his knife out and he was ready to fight, thinking as long as Jesus is on my side, we can overthrow this Roman government. It was a position full of faith, but ignorance. This was not the plan of God. And Jesus said, had that been my plan, all of us would have been fighting, but we weren't. And he reiterates, my kingdom is not from this world. And then Pilate said to him in verse 37, so you are a king. So if you're using this kingdom language, that means you are a king, so maybe the charge that you say is true. And Jesus answered, you say that I'm a king. And then he delivers a purpose statement of why he came to earth. This is why this passage is often used at Christmas, to Christmas patches. It tells why Jesus came. For this purpose I was born. And for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And then Pilate said to him, what is truth? What is truth? I can't think of a better question for our day than that. All throughout the generations, different societies and different times have struggled with the message of Jesus in various ways. The Sadducees didn't believe in the possibility of the resurrection of the body, and so they didn't like Jesus talking about that. The Pharisees couldn't fathom the concept of having a relationship with God apart from the law and apart from being a Jewish, obedient kind of Jewish person. So they couldn't fathom the concept of grace. Later in the New Testament, some began to believe that the body was useless, that it was all about the spirit, and so they didn't understand why Christianity values the body in so many ways. Throughout the generations, some people have wondered, are the miracles really true? Did Jesus really do these things? There's always something, there's always a rub based on a generation, based on a society that causes a group of people not to believe. Well, for our day, it's the concept of truth. For our day, it's the concept of truth. What is truth? Pilate, in many ways, symbolizes what would be a modern day American. What's truth? Notice he asks the question, but he doesn't ask it wanting a response. Jesus says, I've come to bear witness to the truth. I've come to now name reality. That whenever you know me, whenever you follow me, whenever you learn from me, I'm going to explain to you the reality of how this world is. That's what truth is. It's an understanding of the reality of how things are. And what Jesus is saying here is there is a truth that exists beyond us, outside of us. And I've come down to this planet now to reveal that truth to you. And Pilate listens to him, and Pilate almost treats him like a child. Like you're so immature. You're so backwoods. This is so old. And Pilate just goes, what's truth? And he turns away. Now, had he turned toward Jesus and the ultimate authority of life, the greatest authoritarian on this topic that could ever be, asking now the greatest question he could possibly ask, had he turned toward Jesus and said, Jesus, what is truth? And now desiring to know, we can't help but think to ourselves that Jesus would have turned back to him in the same way that he did in chapter 8 and said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am truth. If Pilate wanted to know truth in that matter, Jesus, I think, would have revealed it to him, but he didn't want to know. Instead, he just pushes him aside by saying, what's truth? And notice what he's doing in that moment. By devaluing truth, by devaluing the concept that there is a right and wrong, that there is an absolute, that it does exist, what he's doing in that moment is absolving himself of whatever decision he makes. You see, if truth exists, if it's real, if it's outside of us, if there is an absolute that is there, then Pilate has pressure that's on him. Because in this moment, if there's truth that exists, you have to live in the truth. To live in a lie, to live in a falsehood is going to have these negative consequences upon you, whether they're right here, whether they're in the future. If there is a God, then there could be a future judgment. And so if Pilate bought into truth in this moment, it would cause him to pause and to have to make the right choice. But if he can say, what is truth? He gets to do whatever it is that he wants to do. Go whatever way that it is that he wants to go. And truth to Pilate is just whatever he feels like in the moment. It's whatever he thinks would be right, whatever would be most expedient in that moment. And in his mind, there is no absolute truth, no lasting truth, no lasting consequence to this immediate decision he's going to make other than, does it solve the problem for him? And the great reality is, not only is that the general thought of what truth is in this world today, in many ways, that's the belief in this room. What is truth? You can believe whatever it is that you want to believe. And we can Christianize that and think to ourselves, well, as long as we've walked an aisle and got baptized and maybe attended church on occasion, as long as upstairs we got the faith, it doesn't matter what we do downstairs. Now, this is a legit philosophical question. It's a legit philosophical argument to figure out what is truth. But John's gospel is going to reveal to us that very few people actually are engaging in the philosophy of this question. And they're actually going about it for a different purpose. Remember, John is going to say that the light has invaded the darkness, but that some believe because they love the darkness more than they love the light. And so what John reveals to us here is that Pilate doesn't really care about the philosophy. He's not a really brilliant thinker who's trying to figure out life. All Pilate cares about is justifying his own poor decisions. He doesn't want to change. He doesn't want to submit. He doesn't want to have a heart that reveals to be sinful and a need to be transformed. And so he creates a worldview that now makes him feel good in the midst of his own sinfulness. And the way that he does that is by disproving truth. I'm saying it doesn't exist. And so if you believe that we come from no one and we're going nowhere, then truth doesn't exist. What is truth? There's no right or wrong. And so think about it. Does this explain the world as you know it? Well, in part it does. The world seems chaotic at times. And we can't see that we've come from anyone, and it doesn't seem like we're going anywhere. And so, yeah, it begins to make sense. And all the theories that begin to come in, yeah, it begins to make sense of our world. However, if you believe that we came from no one and we're going nowhere, that means there is no actual right or wrong. There's just feelings that we have. And so why is it that on occasion, whenever you're watching the news and you see a war-torn country and you see a child suffering, why is it that within your heart you say, that's wrong? Why do you feel empathy and compassion? Why is it that whenever we read a report about a trial coming to what we feel like is the wrong conclusion, that we think that's not right, it shouldn't be this way? You see, if we came from no one and we're going nowhere, there is no right or wrong. And so that doesn't begin to explain the impressions that we have, the feelings that we have. It doesn't begin to explain what we just naturally know to be true, that there is something unique and something special. Why is it that we value human life? Why do we value that? Why do we feel empathy and sorrow? If a pack of wolves has a limited number of food and they need to turn on one of their own, we don't in that moment go, oh, that's wrong. We go, that's nature. It's nature. But what is it that allows you, whenever one human being kills another, to say, no, that's wrong? If we came from no one and we're going nowhere, and you just believe in kind of this evolutionary thought of we are what we are, then when one of us kills another one of us, that's just nature. There's no difference. And yet that doesn't fit with what we know to be true. Why not? Because it doesn't tell the whole story. You know what does tell the whole story? Is that we came from someone, and that someone is God. That He created us. And that's why this world has order and complexity. It's why no matter how far down you go into the microscope, you just find more and more complexity. It's why no matter how far you go out with the telescope, you just find more and more complexity, because we come from a sovereign, powerful, just, holy, creative God who spun this world into motion. And we're headed somewhere. We're headed ultimately back into His presence. And between now and then, he tells us a story of how we got here. There's a reason that humanity has value over the rest of the animal kingdom. There's a reason that we value human life more than we value the parakeet. There's a reason. It's because God has put within us, within human beings, His very image and said we are special and unique. It's why every human being has value and meaning and purpose. No matter how bad they are or how good they are, there's a base level of value that is there, which now distinguishes us from everything else. It's why in a moment, in a tragedy, yes, we will save everything we can. Yes, we value all of human life, but I'm saving my baby over my dog. There's a reason. Because my child has the image of God written on him and her. My dog doesn't. I love my dog. But it's a dog. There's a difference that's there. And this worldview, this story begins to make sense of this world. That human beings fell, we rebelled against God, which broke us. Which means our genes and our genetics, our DNA is broken. It begins to explain why disease is present in this world. It explains why we can do horrific things. It explains why some people are truly, it seems like bad people, that they're miswired in many ways. It explains why even the best of us, with the best of intentions, can do horrific things. And so we stand in desperate need of God, unable to now reconcile us back to God. But God, in His great love for us, sent His Son down to this planet to do something that we couldn't do for ourselves. And now whoever believes in Jesus now can have a relationship with God. Now there's much of that story that's hard to believe. Both stories demand faith because we don't know. We can't prove that we came from no one and we're going nowhere. We can't prove at this moment that we came from God and we're going to heaven. Both demand faith. And both have holes in the story where it doesn't seem like the story is fully explaining what's going on. If there is a powerful and just God, why is there so much suffering in this world? Why is there so much chaos? It's hard to comprehend that and to understand that. But in the end, if these are our two options, the Christian story makes more sense. It begins to match more with our own experience. You see, if we came from nothing and if we came from no one and we're going nowhere, whenever you tell your wife that you love her, you don't really love her. That's just a bunch of chemicals in your brain matching with some chemicals in her brain to further the species. There's no weight and value there. It means when a person dies, it's nothing. They're just gone. It doesn't mean anything. And yet, is that your experience? Is that your experience as you looked at your bride on your wedding day, that your love was just empty? It's not my experience as a pastor, as I have stood beside numerous loved ones, church members, as they have died, and you just feel like there is something more. Which of these two stories explains that? The Christian story. You see, Jesus in this moment tells Pilate, I've come to bear witness to the truth. And the truth that Jesus is talking about is not this divide between the values upstairs and the facts on the downstairs. It's not this divide between the sacred on the upstairs and the secular on the downstairs. It's not this divide between religion in the upstairs and science on the downstairs. Jesus has come to reveal the whole house. It's all of it. And his truth now penetrates every aspect of our lives. You see, if we came from no one and we're going nowhere, then you can create these divides because religion doesn't matter, faith doesn't matter. You can believe whatever it is that you want to believe, just don't bother me with it in the midst of it. And there's no absolute truth that is there, so we're just going to do the best we can in this moment, look out for ourselves to the exploitation of everybody else, and we're going to go on about this life. But if we came from someone and we're going somewhere, your decisions matter. Your heart matters. It means now you are a sinner in desperate need of transformation and God's grace and love. It means you have to submit yourself. It means you are not your own God. If we came from no one and we're going nowhere, you are as much a God as anybody else. Now you see the problem? We can claim all day long that we're trying to pursue after some philosophical idea of what is truth. In reality, what we're trying to do is we're trying to justify ourselves. And the Christian story says that truth exists, that it's out there. And that we can discover it now through the help of Jesus. He's beginning to reveal to us. Jesus is revealing the big picture to us. Now, it doesn't mean that the person apart from God can't know some aspects of truth. Clearly they can. Clearly they can. I mean, give me a pilot that knows how to fly a plane. I don't care if I can pray for him. Right? There's a general revelation that is here that you don't need Jesus to understand, but what Jesus is saying here is in the big picture, the big questions of life, the questions that we're truly pursuing of who am I, of why am I here, of what is this life all about, those big questions that we're all trying to get at, Jesus is saying you can't know the answer apart from me. And he says, whoever desires the truth is listening to me. I wonder today, are you listening? You see, if we're not very discerning here, what we're going to do is we're going to buy into this false concept that truth is divided and that the Bible belongs upstairs and it's good and we can talk about it on Sunday morning and read it at home at night, but we'll buy into the idea that it has no relevance with how your business is going to make a decision. We can begin to buy into what Christopher Reeves says, that religion has no place at the table of public policy. And we can buy into this false divide of what truth is all about. And as soon as we do, we've lost the gospel. Now here's the problem. Here's why I think the church at times is okay with this. You see, in American society, as long as religion is upstairs and public life is downstairs, not only does it allow us to be hypocrites, because as long as we prayed the prayer, walked the aisle, got baptized, it doesn't matter how we live because we bought into that divide. It also means that people aren't going to question our faith. They're not going to debate it. They're not going to say, hey, that story makes no sense. Hey, you're wrong here. Or hey, how you're living here doesn't match up with what you're saying there, and so maybe what you're saying isn't true. You see, as long as we believe into this divide, society isn't going to debate religion. It's just going to push it upstairs and say that's your private business. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Just believe whatever it is that you want to believe. And some of us are so uncertain about what we believe that we'll take that. Because we don't want to be questioned. We don't want to be debated. We don't want to be doubted. We don't want to have to give a defense of what we actually believe. We don't want to have to try to make sense of everything. And so we would rather remain in our ignorance and take what we can get upstairs and give away everything else. You know what the bad news of Jesus Christ is? It's all or nothing. He wants the whole house, upstairs and downstairs. And so what it means And we see this in the Sermon on the Mount. We see this in the Lord's Prayer. It means that God cares about the big things. Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, but he also cares about breakfast. Give us this day our daily bread. It means he cares about your own soul and the forgiveness that you need from God and the big things of life, but he also cares whether or not you ask your spouse for forgiveness. Forgive us our debts even as we forgive our debtors. He cares about the whole house. And while you and I see decisions as big and major and minor and to the side, Jesus doesn't look at them in that way. Instead, he wants the whole thing. Now, the downside of that is if we're going to step out into public policy, if we're going to come downstairs and bring faith into the whole house, if we're going to say, no, not only is it un-American to push us aside, it's false to truth itself. We want now a seat at the table. We're going to have to be able to give a defense. Which means we're going to have to educate better. We have to know better. So I was watching graduates pass across the stage Friday night in Greenwood, listening to all the fields that they're going into, all the places that they're going. I just kept on thinking how exciting this is if these young men and young women would take the gospel truth that hopefully they have been taught, if they would continue to grow in it, and then whatever their field they're going into, if they would explore the depths and the truth that is there, because all truth is God's truth. And they would bring back their studies in sociology and anthropology and kinesiology and biology and philosophy. They bring all that back to the church. And we could begin to figure out who is God. In the midst of the biblical truth that is there, that's the beauty of what's supposed to be explored. Whenever you look at God as being in charge of the whole house. So I wonder today, are you content with the God who is just the man upstairs? If so, it might be comforting to you, but it's not Jesus. Jesus wants the whole house. It means we can't box off some area of our lives and say, well, the gospel's over here on the big issues. No, it means this gospel applies just as much tomorrow morning as it does today. It means your ethic is defined just as much by how you treat a customer that will never know it as it does how you treat somebody out here in the parking lot, as it does how you treat me in here. It means the gospel wants to penetrate every nook and cranny of your life and this world. But notice how Jesus does it. This whole sermon, the last 30 minutes, has confronted the major secular belief of this society that many Christians have bought into. But let these last 30 seconds confront the Christian thought. Notice how Jesus brought this truth in love. What is truth? Pilate says. He never looked to Jesus for the answer, but Jesus was about to show him. And he didn't show him in that moment by thumping the Bible over his head. He didn't show him in that moment with a show of power, of force, of manipulation. He showed him in that moment with a full expression of washing the disciples' feet as he died on the cross. And he expressed that truth in love. Once you buy in to the idea that Jesus wants the whole house, and once you submit the whole house to him, he is going to open your eyes to the ways that your heart needs to be changed and transformed. He's going to conform you into the image of his likeness. And he's going to charge you to exit your own house and begin to proclaim that truth. And you and I are charged to do so in love.